a fish called Bronzino, which is also known as European sea bass. And we were growing it in a recirculating aquaculture system, which is a very new way to grow fish. We grow the fish in a closed containment system where the water is recycled and cleaned. We recapture and reuse the waste products of our fish production system. That's namely the poop and the uneaten feed, and even the fish that die in the process of cultivation. And these are used to provide fertilizer to the local Connecticut field farmers, both the external field farmers, as well as the hydroponics farmers and greenhouses in the state. So it's a very elegant food production system where the waste products of fish become the nutrient inputs for produce. And this is, I think, the way that we are going to see an increasing percentage of the seafood we consume in this country produced. It just makes too much sense. It leaves a very low carbon footprint. We are, producing fish right in the very market of the seafood consumers that like our fish, that eat our fish. So transportation costs are very low. As you may be aware, most Bronzino is produced in farms in the Mediterranean in sea cages where all the feed and the poop, drops right into the ocean. And then after the fish is harvested, it is flown, by air freight as a fresh fish across the Atlantic, and then, endures multiple legs of a very convoluted distribution system before it shows up on your plate, many food miles and many carbon footprints later. So that's what we do. And Kurt, you might want to give just a couple of minutes on Found as well.
Yeah, we are a marketing agency based here, not too far away from Eric's facility in Waterbury, Connecticut. Our job is to help support exactly the mission that Ideal Fish is trying to bring to the market and help them amplify that message about antibiotic-free, hormone-free, the shortened chain of supply, and really bring to light the incredible benefits that the recirculated aquaculture brings to the table. And at the same time, to bring some pride to this Northeast facility that is really cutting edge as it relates to what is done for recirculated aquaculture in the United States and in the world. This is a future-proof way of raising healthy food, healthy protein for the world that is being pioneered right here in Connecticut, in New England. And it's something we should be excessively proud of. And what Eric and the team have created is a state-of-the-art facility, which is kind of a model for many places in the United States.
So if I may ask for Eric or Kurt, what was the backstory? What was your previous life that kind of catapulted you into this realm, this pioneering this realm?
Sure. So I'll start. I'm a recovering investment banker. I'd spent, first 20, 30 years of my career working on Wall Street, primarily working in corporate finance. And I had, toward the turn of the century, had begun to look more toward running small companies, and ones particularly in the water filtration space. And so I've learned a lot about emerging water filtration technologies, and at some point got tired of doing the satellite CEO role and commuting across the country to run various small development stage companies, and looked around for something that was local, that combined my experience in water filtration with passions that I have for fish, fishing, eating, seafood, and came across Recirc Aquaculture, believing that this was such a good idea. It must be an enormous industry already, with thousands of facilities producing fish across the country this way. And what I discovered was quite the opposite. It's a very small industry, just beginning to get on its feet. A lot of innovation and problem solving still to be done to make it a viable industry, both commercially and economically. And it looked fascinating to me. And so I was sucked in, like so many other aquaculturists who do things that if they had a chance to think about it, might have scared them away. But almost 7 years later, we're here. We're successfully producing fish. We're building the business model. developing brand awareness, and as you could tell from Kurt's description, hiring the right people to really communicate the message. And we're extremely excited about where we are.
Gavin, welcome. Good to see you. I can tell you've got something to add at this point, so jump in.
Yeah, I watched the video that the Glenn had in the link and everything. I saw the tanks and stuff, and I can get how like your filter background and everything really probably helped a lot with figuring out how to put it together and what to do. I guess one of the questions I had was what does the fish food consist of? Where does that come from, and what's that largely made out of?
Well, it's a great question, because this is an area that's in the midst of some really profound development. There is a real mandate to reduce the reliance of fish feeds on ocean resources. Right now, we are using a fish feed that is comprised of fish meal and fish oil, and these are provided from certified sustainable fisheries. So it's Peruvian anchovy and herring, okay, and smelt that are monitored very carefully and are sustainable. And we are doing this because it's important to feed an animal a diet that evolutionarily it was designed to eat. And you see these problems with other protein supplies, cattle being probably the most well understood, where cattle are fed a diet of corn, when from a gastro system standpoint, they really weren't meant to digest corn. They were meant
grass. Yeah.
Grass. And so we are feeding our fish exactly what they're supposed to eat, so that they can stay healthy and grow correctly, and we don't have animal stress problems. Over time, Gavin, we will find feeds that use either terrestrial sources of protein, or use insects, or use alternatives. And one of the companies that we're working with right now has developed a molecular protein source that doesn't require any type of previously alive organism. And this one is particularly interesting because it can promote accelerated growth. So it's a hugely fascinating area in aquaculture right now that you're going to see a lot of change and a lot of innovation in the coming years. And that's part of why it's so exciting to be in this business.
Yeah, that's really cool. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Getting fish more locally, like from Maine, like menhaden or some other kind of, fish like that, is that possible, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can be, but most of the commercial fish feed fisheries are in areas where the sustainability is much greater. So
okay.
The fish that are used by most of the larger aquaculture feed companies are coming from sustainably certified fisheries. And oftentimes these are in far more remote locations than a more local, but less sustainable, bunker or menhaden fishery in, say, Maine.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that we are best aquaculture practices certified, and that means that this agency looks very carefully into the feed we use, and somewhat understandably, we're also using a feed that is best aquaculture practices certified. So we're pretty buttoned up on the feed side, and this is important because customers will ask us, whether it's retail, customers, the grocery stores, or the homeowner, the home household consumer, want to know about where the feed comes from because of the attention devoted to this issue in the cattle industry.
So I guess I had one other question or thought, or I was just out visiting my daughter in Illinois, and we used to have a manufacturing plant actually in Illinois also, and it's right there, of course, pretty close to the middle of the United States, and getting fish, like I talked to some of the people out there, and they're like, oh yeah, we love seafood, but we're just it's so far away. So but something like this, now that if you're able to produce the fish terrestrially, on the land, then you could set up something in the middle of the United States and have a much shorter distribution system that way also, right? I mean, not only not flying them in from Europe, but also not catching fish on the East Coast or the West Coast and trucking it into the, and all the freezing and temperature control and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you put your finger, Gavin, on exactly the essence of why recirculating aquaculture is so destined for prevalence in this country in terms of our seafood supply chain. You can locate these facilities in Nevada where there is no water. You can locate them in the backyard of major metropolitan seafood markets where they are literally next door to the distribution hubs for the major grocery chains and food service providers. We are literally 5 minutes away from Whole Foods' largest Northeast distribution hub in Cheshire, Connecticut. So literally 5 minutes from us. And this is what makes this is part of what makes recirc aquaculture so sustainable, and how it increases the security around our food supply. Because it's not, the seafood isn't coming from parts unknown. It's coming from a registered, certified aquaculture facility that it serves the local market and stands behind its products. And this is unlike anything else in the protein supply industry right now, other than the farm to table cattle markets. But the large concentrated animal feeding organizations don't have the type of traceability and sustainability that a recirc facility located in the middle of a local market would have. So good question.
So Eric, what was it about Branzino that was your breed of choice? What was the most appealing part of it?
So imagine a Venn diagram, which is the diagram that has the two circles. And in one circle is all the fish that command a relatively high price point, on the ice case. And then the other circle to the right of that circle is fish that will grow well in a RAS system. And what you want to do is find the intersection of those two circles. And there are a limited number of fish that satisfy both requirements. They can be safely and humanely raised in a RAS system, and they are high enough in their price point that they can make the economics of a recirculating aquaculture system work. And there are numerous fish that are in both of those categories. Bronzino happened to be the one that is growing the most quickly. It is becoming a very popular species in this country. You will see it more and more frequently on restaurant menus if any of us were going to restaurants these days. And it is a fish that is easy to grow in a RAS system and does very well, and doesn't suffer stress related to stocking densities and being in a closed containment system. So it was really those criteria that were most important to me.
And what is their life cycle like from, day one to maturity? What's that look like?
So we get the fish from a hatchery, and they come in at about 1/4 grams, so about the size of your thumbnail, about the length of your thumbnail. And they stay in a quarantine/nursery system for 4 months. And we observe the fish during that period. We make sure they're healthy. If they're struggling for whatever reason, we will change water chemistry parameters. We will increase salinity, lower the temperature. We'll do things to remove stress from the fish. We'll spread them out, and we'll get them to the point where they are, performing well. And performing means they're eating and growing at the expected rate. And after 4 months of observation, they're then moved into a much larger tank where they stay for another 8 to 9 months. So after somewhere between 12 and 13 months, that fish has grown from 1/4 gram, the size of your thumbnail, to a little over a pound, which is the target market size. At that size, the fish can be filleted, and they can provide a nice, generous fillet on your plate, or they can be served as a whole fish and aren't so big that they hang over a standard dinner size plate. And this is where this gives chefs, both at home as well as in the restaurants, a lot of flexibility in terms of how they want to prepare and serve that fish.
There's a question in the chat. Ronnie's wondering about distribution and what retail outlets you've got so far.
So right now we are in King's Balducci's, and we are also selling. One of the things I should mention is that we also have other species that we are marketing that we don't grow in our system, but are grown in a very similar system. And we have salmon and we have trout, and those fish can be found in Euclid, which is a fish market in Massachusetts, and they can also be found online. And I would recommend, if you're not close to any of the local retailers, that you go online and buy our fish. And we provide overnight shipping in freezer packed containers for $5 throughout most of the Northeast.
You mentioned the size of them fitting on a plate, which is good for restaurants. So I'm assuming there's plenty of restaurants that are also sourcing their fish from you. Is that correct?
Yes, and we have a program where the chef can call us the day before, and he or she can order a box of fish, and we package it up and ship it overnight, generally via FedEx, and it'll arrive the next day. And the chefs are able to manage their inventory that well. And if they have a heavier night than they thought, then they can order from us again and they get it the following day. So it's been a very successful program, and one that the chefs find helps them manage their refrigerator space in their restaurants.
One of the interesting things that's been observable just through sales is to see, one of the common ways to prepare Bronzino is a whole Bronzino, and not necessarily an American way to consume fish, which Ideal Fish offers it as a fillet or a whole, but to see the uptick in people preparing whole Bronzino at home, they're ordering to their households, has been fairly incredible since we launched. As a marketer, my concern was that nobody would take the whole fish because it just didn't look like as palatable a dish as what Americans would typically eat for seafood. Salmon is the hero at a certain point, or tuna. But to see people adopt the whole Bronzino as a consumable meal is fantastic, because that's one of the preferred ways for chefs to prepare it. And so it's nice to see that uptick over time and the acclamation and the adoption of Bronzino and its preferred serving format, which is great to see.
And that brings up an interesting point, and that is that I think one of the things that was very evident from the beginning when we began working with Found was that Kurt and his team understood that, in addition to enjoying good food and the gastro benefits of eating good food, there's very much a culture around eating in a healthy and sustainable way. And in our sort of brand development, Kurt has done an amazing job helping people understand that when you buy fish, you're not just buying food, you're buying the whole experience around it. You're buying, not only what you're eating, but the way it looks on the table, the health around eating seafood that's high in omega-3s and low in saturated fats, and fish that, are produced in a way that exactly where they came from. And I think this has had a lot to do with how we're finding more and more people are buying and preparing the whole fish, which most retailers will tell you the head-on category has been one that has grown very slowly in the States. And you typically find, fillets and other more easily consumable preparations of seafood on the ice counters at the grocery stores. And what we've seen is exactly the opposite, because I think our customer becomes very enamored with the appearance of a whole beautiful fish that's been prepared in the oven or on the grill as a head-on fish, and the way that it looks almost very Mediterranean in its look. And so in a lot of our marketing, our social media, and the way in which Kurt has developed our brand, we make very strong connections with the Mediterranean lifestyle, the Mediterranean diet, and what it means to eat in a healthy, Mediterranean way. And it has changed consumer behavior. There's no doubt about it.
I've never heard that expression head on as opposed to head off. It's kind of funny, but it is self-explanatory too. And it does, you know, grow up in Australia, the fish markets would be generally head on. That's how you would buy them. But I understand that the American preference is for largely filleted, and it comes in the meat section, everything is deboned as well. So I'm not surprised to hear that sort of preference. And so tell us some of the challenges that you've had sort of pre-COVID and post-COVID. Is there been anything that's, you know, the hospitality industry overall has been, you know, off at the head basically. And I'm wondering how you've been able to pivot with your distribution to get to new markets.
Well, I mean, you know, look, we are an innovative, you know, new system that you know, required custom design engineering, and so you know, I've got a very talented staff of people headed up by a guy who has, you know, run RAS systems virtually all of his life, and there's just been a lot of debugging that we've had to do, you know, kind of pre-COVID, just getting the thing to work correctly, identifying, you know, the engineering issues. I've come to understand that, you know, engineering results in very highly and exhaustively researched, educated guesses. And how actual systems work in practice and in reality is usually very different from the way that they were designed and expected to work, you know, on the drawing board. And the gentleman who runs our operations has learned this firsthand over many years, and has done a masterful job identifying the things that we need to correct and improve in our system. And this is really what we were, you know, doing full throttle prior to the COVID pandemic. And then, you know, the COVID pandemic changed our distribution overnight. We went from selling the vast majority into the restaurant and food service market to seeing that distribution channel for us vanish literally in the middle of March, in the space of 7 to 10 days, as the country shut down restaurants and bars and food service, and kids stopped going to school. And I mean, it just, and at that point we pivoted, and we decided, all right, what we need to do now is to have a robust and healthy, you know, direct to the household distribution channel. And none of us at Ideal Fish knew how to do that. This was, you know, a completely new area for us. Our business plan had always been to sell farm to table, but to sell to the retailers and the restaurants that promoted that type of food system, and going that what is known as the last mile in retail was not part of our plan, and it suddenly had to become part of our plan. And we were fortunate enough to get to know Kurt, to understand, you know, his expertise in this and how to position us with the household, which is a very different message than what you're providing to the retailers. The B2B customers are looking at economics, they're looking at shelf life, they're looking at things that have to do with meeting their own internal sustainability criteria. And the household consumer is all over the place. Some want sustainability, some want price, some want lifestyle. And being able to thread the needle and figure this out was extremely challenging for us until we had a chance to meet with Kurt and his team and really put together a very cohesive, you know, lifestyle branding message around Ideal Fish, so that you buy the fish, you have an ideal fish, but you also have an ideal lifestyle in some respects. So that's been the big change for us, is, you know, marketing to the consumer post-pandemic. We're in the midst of the pandemic, and we believe that this is one of these fundamental shifts that's not going to go away, you know, even after the pandemic subsides, and as a you know, society, we begin to revert to more normal behaviors. We think people will eat more fish at home, they will buy more fish online, and they will buy it directly.
And they certainly, the nice thing is that one, obviously Ideal Fish pivoted very quickly internally as well. They went from an organization that was focused on retail and restaurants and allowed their supply chain, meaning, how you package and get rid, ship your fish, turned into an individualized home experience, number one, which is not an easy thing to pivot on. But two, there is a benefit, which is great to see in the marketplace from a timing perspective, is that one, obviously, from a pandemic perspective, households wanted to get good food delivered to their home. If they weren't going to be out and about, how do I get high quality product to my home? I'm going to cook more, but I don't want to cook bad stuff. Also, if you're cooking more, you suddenly care about the quality in a whole new way. You put your trust in the hands of the restaurant previously. Now you need to have trust in the people that are supplying you the food. And so already being in a place that had a relationship with the concept of sustainability, of antibiotic free, hormone free, the concept of fish being a high value protein in your diet. And suddenly the focus went from just getting a plate of seafood at a local restaurant to preparing it and making sure it's good for my family and safe and secure. And it really, also the one other event that comes along with this has been this long time period that we've all been in this environmental perspective of growing awareness across the US population for not only the fact that there's global warming, but now you can actually help contribute to that challenge. It used to be, yeah, I want my government to do something about it. Even I think mid this year, 66% of the people in the United States said, I want the United States government to do more about the environmental issues facing us. So you've got a lot of people, but think about that, the fact that people can contribute back to that system. Now they can be guilty of not supporting the system as much as being a critic of the systems that are out there. And so what you see is an ownership in the consumer side, which is very important, that allows them to be a participant in making a better future, selecting better sources, caring about where their food source is from. So there's really almost a triple witching event of support that helped the Ideal Fish brand at this point in time. And they were in the right place at the right time with a great product.
And that consumer empowerment is a big part of the messaging strategy that Kurt's been pulling together for us, is giving the consumer that choice. And we listen to our consumers, we solicit their feedback on how to improve our products, on how to create more products that are more, preparation ready. For example, our fish all come, scaled, gutted, fin clipped as a whole fish, so that all you need to do is coat them with olive oil, stuff the gut cavity with a lemon, and put them in the oven. And this is how Americans typically eat seafood, with less muss and less fuss. So that's been a key part of our product development process, informed, by our experience with the customer.
So you talked about how you sustainably grow and farm and produce the fish. Are there any areas of the business where you also use sustainability measures? Like, for instance, like maybe the way you package the fish or the ways you distribute it? Or is that something like you're looking into for the future at least?
No, it's absolutely part of what we're doing. And packaging is a big part of that. The conventional way of shipping fish has been in styrofoam, which is from an economic standpoint and from a thermal standpoint, a fantastic material. But most styrofoam is not biodegradable, and you can't really fold it or break it down. It just sort of stays in its form. And even getting the styrofoam containers is not very sustainable, because you have to fill up a truck virtually with air to have all these styrofoam containers delivered to your facility. So you're using, this huge carbon footprint to transport a lot of air, because it's all inside these styrofoam containers. So we've moved away from styrofoam. Kurt's been with us through the, exploration of various packaging products. We finally come across one that works in pretty much any weather condition. The warmer months in the summer obviously present different challenges than the cooler months in the winter. And we found one that, really does provide reliable thermal control for our products when shipped, even as long as 2-day air. Although for the most part, we like to ship overnight, and developed a shipping cost structure that permits that economically for the customer. But packaging, I would say, is one of the big ones. Other inputs, we grow an ocean-going fish in salt water. And so finding, sustainable supplies of salt, which we mix with Waterbury tap water to provide the right salinity for these fish so that they can grow in a healthy and sustainable way, has been an important part of this. I mentioned our facility manager, who has found ways to reduce the water that we do discharge. We discharge a small amount of water, and he has found ways to close that down so that we produce less water, we consume less water. So it's really run sort of throughout the system. Everything that we do is examined from a sustainability standpoint, whether it's the packaging materials, the source of the protein for our fish feed, and the way that we run our system to minimize waste is all part of that, about that continuous process improvement.
Yeah, and by the way, that it's not limited to the big things. It includes things like the smoked fish, which uses resources from local communities. We the whiskey barrels from a local distillery, using that to smoke the fish and give it a beautiful flavor profile. The wood from local apple orchards here in Connecticut. You're not transporting this content, this fuel, from a distant source. You're doing it locally, so that's got that double benefit of you're not adding miles to the goods, and at the same time you're supporting the local community by taking advantage of things that are essentially potentially their waste at a certain point and putting that back into a productive cycle of producing great food in the community.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's all about trying to create this closed loop food system where the waste products of some other process, whether it's apple production or whiskey production, become the inputs for our smoked fish, and the waste from that then becomes the nutrient inputs for the apple growers and the ones who produce produce. And so it is all about what is called a multitrophic food production system. And this is really what's exciting about this industry right now, is that unique to RAS, we can do this. There's no other aquaculture methodology, technology available right now that allows you to recover and reuse your waste products. RAS is unique that it can capture it and use all of these would-be waste products as valuable inputs to other food production systems.
Do you have any problem with the, because obviously, you're growing them in salt water, the waste, does it have much salt in it? Is that a problem for for the farmers who are using it, or is it negligible? Or
it's negligible, in part because one of our technologies is a system called a vacuum drum filter.
Oh,
and
yeah.
what we do, and this is a technology that's been around for a long time, and it's used in chicken processing plants. Anytime where if you're cooking chicken, you create kind of a fatty sludge, and what this technology does is it removes that fatty sludge from the water. So what we do is we run our fish waste through it, and this machine sucks the salt water out of the fish waste. So the fish waste doesn't have a lot of salt water left in it, and doesn't have a whole lot of salt in it as a result. And the composting process generally blends it in with other forms of organic material and roughage that provides structure to the compost. And so the amount of salt that is still resident in our fish waste is not an issue.
Yeah.
Ronnie asked in the chat if your fish is kosher certified.
Yeah, so both our Bronzino and our smoked Bronzino is kosher certified by Circle U or OU, Orthodox Union. And we have a hot smoked salmon product that is also kosher certified. And we will be introducing a smoked trout in the next few weeks, and that will be kosher certified as well.
Wow. Are you working with Whole Foods on distribution yet?
We are, and they are actually very interested in our product. I'll be candid, Whole Foods is not the easiest of the retailers to deal with. And I've had it expressed to me in the past by other suppliers to Whole Foods that it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. You go through an absolutely arduous qualification process, which we would have, frankly, no trouble satisfying, only to be found that you're so badly beaten up on price.
Yeah, right.
Just not worth it.
Why did I do it? Right.
so it's a constant negotiation. We expect to be in Whole Foods next year.
Yeah.
It's been a process, a labor of love, I should say.
Right. So do you mix all the different kinds of fish together, or do they take turns in the pool?
So, and I appreciate the confusion around this. We're only growing one species in Waterbury, and that is the Bronzino, the European sea bass. The salmon and the trout we are procuring from facilities that are identical to ours. They're, recirculating aquaculture facilities that recover and reuse their waste, that limit discharge into the environment, that are nearby so that the fish aren't traveling food miles. The trout come from Cape Cod, and they're raised in a land-based recirculating system there. So we are stamping these fish ideal fish because their production complies with our very lofty ideals around how fish ought to be produced. Everything from a sustainability to an animal welfare standpoint, to a freedom from antibiotics and growth hormones and other chemotherapeutics. We make sure that these fish are all grown the same way we would grow the fish if we actually owned the production facility. And this compliance checking is routine and conducted, throughout the supply chain.
Interesting.
In a way, it's similar to, we have another Chibasa Bakery is a company that we're involved with a bit, and they recently set up a thing with another bakery that makes different kinds of bread than they do, and just said, like, why are we all driving around delivering at all these stores, and then you're driving around delivering all these same stores? How about we just get together, share a truck, and cut down our carbon footprint, delivery model. And it sounds like it's a similar kind of thing. You guys are all doing this similar kind of thing, but if somebody wants salmon and one night and Branzino another night, but they can consistently just go and order it from one place and or get a whole variety delivered to them, it makes much more sense than going to different places for different things.
That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
and at a certain level, it's also not easy to go direct to consumer. So being able to facilitate the expertise of raising trout locally here, adjacent in Massachusetts, and taking advantage of being able to say, this is Ideal Fish certified. This is another one of the world's purest fish in terms of the way it's raised and the flavor and everything else. Let's make sure that we take advantage of our built distribution platform of Ideal Fish that's direct to consumer during a challenging time for other wrap developers right now, because it's not an easy time. As you pointed out, things have shifted from the retail restaurant side, and the consumers, there's a gap here. The consumers are asking for this supply, and Ideal Fish has stepped up and tried to make sure that they're providing that to the local community, particularly here in New England.
I think it's a brilliant move because the brand is like standing out like the good housekeeping seal of approval that makes people feel safe and good to use it. I've been curious about a company, I can't think of their name, but they're out of Alaska, and they kind of have a different model where it's almost like Fish of the Month Club, but they want you to sign up and for monthly deliveries, which is one of the reasons why I haven't done it, because it's too much fish. And also they don't really let you pick and choose the brand, the kind of fish you want. It's like they make a selection and that's it. And it also seemed rather pricey, but considering they're shipping from Alaska, fresh off the boat, I guess. But I would think that there would be more opportunities for that kind of collaboration too. Perhaps under your label, where, fish literally fresh from the ocean, from a number of sources, could be part of your offering, because there's still this appeal, albeit it can be expensive, but the idea of it being fresh in the water, because I often think about the scientific, the salinity levels and everything that you're working with, and I'm sure you've mastered it, but it's not the same as, like, let's say mother's milk feeding a baby, where it's made perfect in nature and you cannot replicate it. And I have that feeling about the fresh, clean waters of ocean-bound fish, or fish that are fresh caught from real, good rivers, let's say.
So let me share sort of an interesting dynamic that is something that people who research aquaculture discover, and that is that Mother Nature is not always the most hospitable place to live in life, and particularly not the part of Mother Nature that is under constant pressure from human existence. And obviously I'm talking about the oceans. The oceans, unfortunately, have become, for the population of this planet, the dumping ground. And so the marine life in the ocean suffers from everything from, elevated levels of mercury and PCBs to now a new threat, which is the microplastics, which appear in almost every, product that we use, from facial cleansers and exfoliants all the way to, dishwashing detergents and things like that. So the ocean tends to put pressures on wild fish populations as well. There are meteorological issues, salinity variations, temperature variations. And with global warming, we're finding that fish now are struggling to exist in areas where they have for centuries existed. Salmon populations are moving further north because the water is colder there. Yeah. And what we're able to do in recirc aquaculture, and this is fascinating, is we can create an environment for the fish that allow this organism to grow at its genetic entitlement, meaning that the fish will grow faster and in a higher performance way, where they require less feed to put on a pound of weight than they will in the wild environment. And it's because we can optimize everything we do for that particular species. And I think you asked about, whether or not we commingled species, and we don't, for a number of reasons, but the biggest reason is that we can really optimize the water temperature, the salinity, the pH, the hardness, the flow rates, the water exchange, the amount of oxygen that's in the water for Bronzino. And they will grow in a more healthy way and much more quickly and much more efficiently than they will in the wild. So in a way, we have improved on Mother Nature in our internal system. Yeah. We also protect them from pathogens that they will experience in the wild. And so they tend not to get as infected by external pathogens. Sure. So it's a very interesting twist on wild fish. And what you discover is that wild fish aren't the panacea that everybody kind of thought they were. Farm fish can really provide a better product that tastes better and better itself, except for that one kind of bad day at the end of their cycle.
And don't forget that you're also putting the supply close to the demand from a chain, supply chain perspective. So you now are taking potentially a trout that was not readily available as a broadly supplied fish here in Connecticut, unless you had a fishing rod and a permit, and making that commercially available directly to the home at a pure level that says, exactly where this came from now. This sourcing is right here in your backyard. So it's not shipped from Alaska to here for the salmon, as an example. It's actually just up the coast here. So that, is also, when you look at the whole picture, and I understand exactly what you're talking about, Ronnie, having fresh fish is an interesting definition. And what is the definition of fresh fish? I think technically it's 21 days from the time it got out of the water is the broad definition of fresh these days. Is that correct, Eric, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, and Ronnie, you were talking about Wild Alaskan Salmon Company. and they have made a huge blitz, in the pandemic era to, market their products. And yeah, you're right. They're a subscription only model. And some people like that. Some people don't. We provide an option. You can do one-off purchases if you want. You can buy more than one product if you want. And you can also, lock into a periodic automatic delivery. That's what you'd like to do.
Sure.
So this is a large part of, how we're approaching this. And, Kurt has made a big point of saying, look, we are a customer-centric organization. And everything we do needs to be customer-centric.
Right.
And whatever our customers want is what we need to provide them. And like you, not all customers want to have to buy month after month after month the same thing.
Right. Well, that's interesting, though. Kurt raised an interesting question because I didn't know the definition of fresh was that many days. But I do know the difference of taste when you pull a fish out of the water and fry it up that afternoon versus even buy it at a fish store. And so I'm curious, does your fish have the same flavor profile all the way through? Have you tested it to the extent that, the day you harvest it, it's still just as robust as, 4 or 5 days down the road?
Yeah, that's a great question. Every harvest we have runs through a QC process where we will have a fish that will be filleted, and we have a specific method of cooking the fish so that we can sample it and determine whether or not the fish has the flavor profile we're targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a very important part, Ronnie, of what we do. We want to have a consistent product that tastes better than what is obtainable through other sources.
Right.
And in the case of, our fish, because you're eating a fish that in some cases is less than a day old, you're getting, a much fresher fish. There was a funny story. I think I mentioned Kings and Balducci's earlier. When we first started shipping to them, one of the store managers called the head of procurement there and said, you know what? These Ideal Fish guys are selling us frozen fish. And the procurement manager said, well, that's really weird because I don't think they are. So describe to me the box, was the ice soft in the box? And the fish manager said, yeah, the ice was soft, but the fish were stiff. And at that point, the King's procurement manager laughed and said, that fish is still in rigor mortis. It is so fresh.
Oh, no.
It's not frozen, it's in rigor mortis, which is what generally relaxes after about a 24-hour period. So that's how fresh our fish were, that they were mistaken for being frozen.
I don't think you want to advertise that, however.
No, you don't, but it's a funny anecdote.
It is. It
gives
is.
you sort of a sense for, the difference in the supply chain. And the reason that there is such a long period of time for fresh fish is that, the wild fish that we catch in this country generally is caught pretty far offshore. There aren't fisheries of any size that are commercial fisheries, close enough to shore that the trawlers can go out for short time. So to find really productive fisheries generally last, certainly 2 weeks, sometimes 3. And fish that are caught in the early part of a trawl are then, put in the holds with ice and often frozen, because if you catch a fish in the early part of a 2-week trawl, you really have to ice it down and keep it cold in order for it to still have shelf life when you get back a week and a half later. And so, fresh fish often has been frozen, although it's not recognized as, the conventional term, which I don't like, but it's the refresh idea that you take a frozen fish, you thaw it out, and now you have a refresh product. Now, honestly, fish tend to do okay as frozen products, better than any other protein. They tend not to experience the mealiness that happens when you freeze a protein, but at least you should know kind of what you're getting.
Yeah.
And think about the fact that the fish that Ideal Fish are raising are getting all of the same food. They're getting all of the same everything. It's the same water. It's the same. So when you actually taste one of those fish out of that water, you're tasting all of them. And if and Ideal Fish has done this. If it's not meeting the flavor profile, you reject that harvest of fish. And because you know that fish translates to almost every single fish in that collection. So at the same time, you have the benefit of the fact that because you know that flavor profile is the same. So when you check one, you're essentially checking that whole entire harvest, which you can't do in the wild. Every single fish is having an independent experience. One of them had a lamprey eel on it. One of them ate something horrible, and just, you don't know. And guess what? You're not going to know. You will never know. And so with Ideal Fish, you're actually, think of it as a production line of perfection in terms of, exactly what each harvest is coming through as.
Yeah. You're baking the cookies. They're on the same batch. Yeah.
And we trace the fish from baby to finished product too. So we know where that fish, in fact, the fish that appear in our retail stores have a gill tag on them. You can scan that gill tag. The back of the gill tag is a QR code. You can scan that in your phone and it will give you the whole provenance of the fish from the day it arrived at our facility, the day it was harvested and shipped to our customers.
Right. Well, folks, we're nearly, we're past it actually, but I did just want to kind of be mindful of that because some folks have got places to go, but it's been a fascinating conversation, Eric. I can hear that you're more excited about this than perhaps Wall Street, and there's plenty to be excited about. I mean, the other thing we didn't get to talk about was all of the sort of the carbon footprint that is saved when you don't have to go out 200 or 300 miles offshore to find these fish, and all of the implications around that kind of supply chain as well.
Yeah, I was gonna mention the whole, because I spend a lot of time up in Maine, but those lobster boats go out there and pick up all those lobsters and stuff, and I got a friend of mine who does that, and he says he uses basically like 25 gallons of diesel fuel every single day, and it comes back with a couple hundred lobsters, but so you sort of add that up, and that's just the beginning of the process. Then they're gonna go to some other place and get shipped someplace, whatever. And that's just, that's stuff that's only a few miles away from the harbor. So yeah, like Glenn says, you go read in Greenlaw's book about sword fishing out there in the Atlantic, and they're going thousands of miles out there to get that stuff, and then freezing it, and all the energy involved in freezing it and then bringing it back, and it's just huge.
Can I ask one last question, or is it have we run too late, Glenn?
You'll wrap it up, Ronnie, so go for it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of interested in this. At what point do you know that you're ready to branch out? Meaning, I can imagine once you've gotten this down and you've perfected it, that you're either going to start other locations, as we talked about earlier, let's say in the middle of the country, or that you're going to have a consultancy business on the side or something where you're helping those fledgling operations get up and running. Are you considering that yet, or do you need to reach a certain level of sales and productivity before you're ready to take that on?
No, we're there. We believe that we have a very scalable and replicable and expandable model.
Mm-hmm.
There's never going to be a time when we will pretend that we've figured everything out.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always learning, continue to make mistakes, continue to have aha moments, and continue to improve. That will always be true of Ideal Fish, but we're at a point now where we understand the basics enough about how to do this and what to do, and our plan is to build multiple facilities in separate buildings so that we can grow different species, and we can add to our product lineup our own maybe or red snapper or an olive flounder of some type. We've got a list of other fish that appear in both of the circles of the Venn diagram I discussed earlier that are candidates, and we intend to build them in Connecticut, where we can create economies of scale and reduce production risk and benefit the state and benefit consumers not only in Connecticut but what is the largest seafood market in North America, which is the area between Boston and Washington D.C.
Yeah.
So we're in the right place to really build out our business. And as we do that, we'll be looking at, other locations across the country.
Right.
So we're at
That's
that
great.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the other challenge there is that we going to have to reinvent the verb, not so much seafood, but ideal fish, right? So
That's right.
that might be an additional challenge. But thanks, Kurt and Eric, for sharing an hour plus with us. But thank you all again for coming. A great conversation. Really learned a lot. And have a good Friday.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very
Okay.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Yeah.